It's about a week ago that we saw the Minister of Finance in Canada, Chrystia Freeland, resign. When you heard about the report, what came to your mind first?
Well, I mean, clearly it's a government in disarray. It's quite shocking about sort of how the prime minister mismanaged his whole cabinet shuffle. Ultimately, it was about a cabinet shuffle. He tells the finance minister on Friday that, thank you for your service. I'm going to give you a new job next week sometime. But before I give you the new job, I still want you to go to the House of Commons and deliver the fall economic statement. Even though you disagree with a number of the things that we're doing financially, you're going to sell it for a few days, and then I'm going to demote you. And for him to not consider that she wasn't going to be happy about that is quite surprising, and it really shows his lack of judgment and certainly a lack of emotional intelligence. The way she did it was pretty dramatic. She not only resigned, but she penned a pretty poisoned letter there saying that, essentially a number of their initiatives, and that they were, quite frankly, touting up until that moment. She called them gimmicks, the GST holiday on some things and not others, their idea of having a $250 check for some people and not others. She said those are gimmicks. We can't afford it. We got to keep our fiscal house in order. So it was pretty dramatic, and the saga continues.
Yeah. In the spirit of the finance minister calling that gimmicks, and you called it a house in disarray for the prime minister. How do we appraise the time that she spent in office so that we don't dwell too much on other factors that I've heard a lot of people talk about? But I find a lot of the news articles that I've read and the interviews that I've actually heard from the news media up until now, they've not talked about how do we appraise the time she spent in office. But for you, the 4 years or thereabout that she spent in office, how do you appraise that?
Well, I don't think she was 4 years as finance minister, but I could be wrong about my math there. She replaced Bill Morneau, who also equally had a disagreement with the prime minister about the direction of spending. So, I mean, I'm highly critical of her in her position as finance minister. I think you can probably assess what she did as deputy prime minister or what she did previously on trade. Those seems to be successes. When you look at the government mandate letter. So what Prime Minister Trudeau did is that every cabinet minister has a mandate letter, and he's made those public. And the things that struck me in those letters, especially to her, was that she had to maintain the fiscal position of Canada, much like he had asked Bill Morneau to do, that she was supposed to not increase any permanent spending. That was in her first finance letter, though in a subsequent one, he kind of watered that down, but effectively to keep our fiscal house in order. And by that metric, she's failed spectacularly. I mean, this is a prime minister who in 2015 said, we will have modest deficits for a couple of years and then we'll balance the books. Well, I mean, okay, let's assume we're going to give them a break over COVID, but COVID's in the rear view mirror, and they're still spending as if there is no tomorrow. They continue to increase not just their spending, but they also keep on blowing past their self-imposed, restrictions. She said, we're going to have a guardrail. We're not going to go beyond $40 billion in deficit in any year. And then this fall economic statement is at $62 billion. So it's an increase of 55%. So by those metrics, by the metrics of the mandate letter, by the metrics of just fiscal prudence, I think she's a failure, because she was either a willing accomplice in increasing public spending, or she should have resigned earlier to tell him that, no, I cannot fulfill your mandate that you've given me if you're asking me to keep on increasing not just the deficit, but permanent spending, right? And the permanent spending, which I talk about in that article, are the child care provisions, the dental care provisions, and the pharma care provisions. Those are all new programs that have permanent spending attached, and not just for the federal government, but equally for the provincial governments, because those are all areas of provincial jurisdiction. So they are compounding debt and deficits, not just federally, but provincially, to future generations.
So if they're compounding federal deficit, like you just said, and she being the finance minister and Trudeau being the prime minister, and the manner in which she exited office, calling the financial spending by the government gimmicks, would you say that it was the prime minister or the federal cabinet that moved the goalpost on her, or was she just on board with the same spending thrift that they were doing for the last 4 years or thereabout?
Yeah, I think to a point, I mean, we'd certainly have to ask her and that she's not answering any questions. I think up until this session of Parliament, I think she was a willing accomplice. I mean, she has certainly campaigned heavily on the childcare provisions in particular. She has been full-throated saying that this is how you do feminism, this is what a feminist government looks like, and she touted all the reasons why we would need to have childcare provisions paid for, and she really focused that on making sure that working age mothers are in the workforce. And she even said at one point that how they pay for this is just the fact that you'd have more women working, though that hasn't come to fruition yet. She's also been very supportive of the pharmacare and dental care provisions insofar as that she's taken credit for them as finance minister. I think where she has disagreed with the prime minister is these most recent announcements that are short term, that these are, that I think that's what she's referring to when she says gimmicks, the GST holiday for 2 months, and you can sort of unpack that thing. They're making it sound as if they've taken a GST off of our groceries, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. We've never had to pay GST on essential goods, on groceries. Your fruit and vegetable has never been subject to GST, nor your meat, nor any of the sort of the whole foods that a healthy diet would allow. Mm-hmm. What they've given us over the holidays is discretionary spending. They said, go ahead and buy some chips and beer. Like, essentially, that's where the GST is coming.
Processed food for the most part.
Yeah, processed food, like, ready meals in grocery stores, which are high in salt. And, you can talk about how that is not a healthy alternative. And then eating out at restaurants, which equally is probably not something that most of us want to do over the holidays. A lot of people just sort of stay at home and sure, it'd be nice not to pay a GST on a bottle of wine, but that the having that break this year is just something our children and grandchildren are going to have to pay for in interest payments in the future. So it's cold comfort to say we've gotten this break, and everyone loves free money. I actually went out for dinner at lunch yesterday, and it was like, oh yeah, it was nice not having to pay HST on that meal, but I know I'm going to pay for it in my taxes. So that's sort of truly a gimmick. I think that, and it was a way to buy votes, and that hasn't worked for them. Obviously, even before her announcement, they didn't get any bump in the polls for this announcement. And then equally, they wanted to do this $250 check where they were going to give it to anybody who worked last year who made less than, I think it's $150,000, which is a pretty big salary. They were going to give it to a lot of people. Yeah. And then they were negotiating with the NDP about, why not seniors? Why not students? All the rest of it. And again, she said, we just don't have the money to do that. We're already blowing past our budget. And now you want to have increased, basically, vote buying just before an election in hopes that people will think favorable of you and reelect us. And so I think she was right to say that those were gimmicks. But let's not forget that she also was the architect of some pretty expensive programs that we still are ill able to afford.
The analytics on this channel show about 95% of the viewers on the channel haven't subscribed yet. So you do me a favor by clicking the subscribe button right now. Then I'll keep my promise to continually improve on the quality of the conversations that are produced on this channel every time.